Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar series. I'm joined today by Christopher Nordstrom and he is going to be talking to you about Kanban testing and Lego. And if you have any questions for Christopher, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so you can ask him whatever questions that springs to mind. But remember, you can type your questions at any point during the course of the webinar and we will have a look at them at the very end. So now let me hand you over to Christopher. Hello, Christopher.
Hi, Farag. Thank you so much for introducing me. Let's see, I hope everyone can see my screen now and that you can hear me loud and clear.
We can indeed.
Excellent, excellent. Let's see if I can get some room here as well. That should be fine. All right, so my name is Christopher Nordstrom and I'm here today to give you basically what was my keynote last year at EuroSTAR 2015. I was asked to give it again and I was more than happy to oblige. I'm going to talk about today Kanban testing and Lego, and I'm basically going to talk about a case study where we, in a team, we took a tool, a test tool that was poorly maintained, was just an absolute mess on the inside, and it had more or less been abandoned by its users and testers. And I want to tell you how we turned it into something that our users loved, that we continuously deployed, and that we use globally now on 3 different continents throughout over the world. And also how we used coffee mugs and Lego in that process. So with that being said, let's get started. So I also want to mention today one very important lesson, and that is, why do we need fun at work? And also I'm going to talk a lot about culture in organizations. And I also want to mention why management consultants don't work when it comes to changing a organization's culture. If you are bringing in a management consultant to do that, well, please think again. It doesn't work. Cultures and organizations are way too complex organisms to manage in that way. So, I do have heroes in my life. And yes, you heard correct. I'm a grown man, 36 years old, who have heroes in his lives. Now, my heroes are not the Marvel Avengers, although I love a good Marvel movie. My heroes are the ones that you see popping up on the screen here. These are people who have had a huge and profound impact on the way that I not only approach my work, but the way that I see and view people in organizations where I work, and how I reflect upon how we communicate. And I am ever so grateful to each and every one of these people because they have had a personal impact on me. Now there is one hero that I actually put a bit above all the other heroes here, and it's this guy here. Now hopefully most of you should be able to recognize him, or at least recognize the name below, and this is of course Jerry Weinberg. They all talk about putting people and interactions above technology and projects, and that is one of the things that makes them my heroes. But before I dive further into that, let's talk a bit about me. These are, after all, my 5 minutes in the spotlight. So who am I then? Well, as I said, my name is Christopher Nordstrom. I am the owner of a consulting firm called Northern Test Consulting, where I specialize in providing technical test services. I am something that I generally describe as a test developer. Now I have a background as a programmer and developer. I had the education for that. But what I do for real life is I work with testing, and that's where I really find my passion. So I apply my developer and programming skills to the test work that I do. And that is why I call myself a test developer. I just love to do testing. But if you are to summarize it a bit more, you could say that I'm a test developer who loves to automate stuff. And some of you right now listening may think that, whoa, this is just another snotty developer who thinks he can solve all the different test problems through automation. I'm not going to listen to any more of this. Well, before you log out or disconnect from this webinar, let me just say that I'm a test developer who loves to automate so that testers can focus on quality human testing, or the sapient testing. Because we need to have automation in place so that we can take care of all the boring checking, all that kind of stuff that we still need to do most of the times, over and over again. But in order for testers to have time to do the really, good stuff testing, we need to take care of that. And automation is one tool to do that. So I'm a test developer who loves to automate so that testers can focus on quality human testing. What I also discovered over the years is that I am utterly fascinated by the human side of software development. That is something that is really intriguing to me, and you will hear more about that throughout the webinar today. So with that being said, let's leave myself out for the time being. There will be plenty of opportunities to mention stuff I've done in the past over the coming hour. So I told you that my heroes are heroes that put the people and their interactions in a project first. Now, technology is always going to be part of the projects that we run. We're in the IT, the software development industry, most of us. But what really comes first is the people and interactions. And Jerry Weinberg has one of the most famous quotes by him, is basically where he says software development is a social activity through and through. We're always going to have technology, but it always starts with a person somewhere who has a need, or an organization who has a problem that they need solved. So someone needs to phrase that problem into something they can order from someone else. Now you're going to have another person on the other end talking to the customer, interpreting the requirements, what they need, and all that, and maybe write it down into use cases or requirements. You're also going to have developers who's going to talk to the project leads or the requirements analysts, and they're going to need to understand how they're going to implement the user stories or the features. There's going to be communication in between them. And you're going to have testers, of course, in this. Nowadays, it's very common that the tester is part of the Agile team, so luckily we're part of the discussion up front with the developers at the same time. But we also need to understand what are we going to test. How is this feature going to be implemented? What is the actual problem we're solving for the customer? And then we're going to have other people. We're going to have IT departments who may need to launch the products that we develop. We're going to have the customer on the far end who needs to use this. And the person who's going to use this may not be the same person who actually ordered it to start with. So they're going to need to understand how to use the software that we're developing. So you can see all through this whole process, there's just social activity and communication per meeting all over the place. It's such a huge part of the whole process that I've been thinking about this for the last couple of years, and last year at EuroSTAR I had the audacity to launch a new manifesto, which I quite humbly called the Humanistic Software Development Manifesto. And that is that I value people solutions over technological solutions. I value company culture over manuals and instructions. I value context over process. And I do very much value a culture that supports self-management over rule-based management. That is, while there's value on the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So all these things are important. But first and foremost, I see that people, culture, and a sense of culture where we support self-management is much more important than the actual technological solutions, the manuals, the processes, or if you have rules in place how we should act and behave. With that being said, let me give you a short background about the case I want to describe to you today. So a few years back, I was part of a team at a customer where we developed a test framework for doing automated non-functional testing. So I did most of the architect, design, and the implementation of that. And then I moved on to greener pastures. I moved elsewhere. A couple of years later, my former employee, a consultancy firm, and their customer came back and said, well, hi, Christopher, you know the test framework that you put in place a few years back? And I said, yeah. Well, turns out that it's being used in more places than the local site in our town. I said, really? Yeah. It's now being used in 3 different continents, in different places and products. And I was just blown away. My little framework, my baby, being used like that? Wow, that was so fun. And they said, well, we realized by now that we need to ramp things up. We're going to give it an extra push. We're going to make a project of it, and we're going to inject some new features into it. Would you be interested in coming in as a team lead and oversee the architecture and all the technical decisions? So my ego was pleased, and of course I wanted to join them. So I agreed to that. And the company, or the customer that we worked for, was a global telecommunications equipment manufacturer, very old, plus 100 years. And the culture in the company was that they were an engineering company first and foremost, because that's the way that they had been built over the decades. They had a sense of pride in that they were engineers. They could build most of the things themselves. And that also led to them heavily being affected by the not invented here syndrome. So that is, if something wasn't invented in-house by them, probably wasn't as good as it could be, or they could do it better. It also was a massive global company, so very rigid, a lot of processes, of course proclaiming to be agile, or agile their way. But it was kind of a challenge to work in there, because things took time to change. Now the upside was that I was joining a team with my former employer, a consultancy firm. So we had some sort of autonomy. We were located outside of the company's main premises. And we were all consultants used to working in another way. I also had the luxury of having worked with each and every one on the team beforehand. So most of us, we kind of knew each other since before. So we had a very short start in order to get started and form and norm as a team. And these were really, really technically skilled people. They were really good, driven, ambitious, and it was just a joy to start working with them again. Now there may have accumulated some technical depths over the years with the product. So when I was brought back in, my initial thought was, well, I remember how I left this product. It was in a nice state. Sure, there were a few things that could have been improved. I wonder what they had done to it over the years. I may have heard rumors, but nothing prepared me for the first day when I came in eager, happy, downloaded the source code, and I opened it, and I wept. I screamed, and I was angry. I was really, really frustrated. What the bleeping had they done to my framework? What had they done to my baby? It was absolutely atrocious. This product was, for numerous reasons, written in Java. And I won't bore you with too much of details, but if you ever developed in Java, just think reflections and then someone opening a bag with the product, vomiting all over it with reflections, and there you had it. It was just an absolute mess to work with. It took us weeks just to understand how the large puzzle pieces fit together any longer. It's just almost impossible. The technical depth was actually so bad that the team who had been working on this the last couple of years, who by the way were not developers, they were IT people sprinkled with some software development over it, but they were in nowhere software developers, they had abused this framework to the point where they had not been able to put out a release in 5 months. And I'm not talking about putting out a release because we have too much to do, we won't make the deadline, yada yada. I'm talking about they couldn't put together a release because the product was in such a bad state that they didn't know how to produce the binaries necessary. The technical debt was huge and humongous. So naturally, I was a bit frustrated at that point. And this, of course, having the team not being able to do a release in 5 months had led to disillusioned users, testers who by now were really frustrated, who had given up on this test framework, because you know how it is if we work with a test automation framework. It solves most of our problems, but there's going to be bugs in there. This is software just like anything else, and there's going to be features that we need so that we can write that special test case that we want to. And of course, nothing had come out in 5 months. And it's not like it was a high-producing factory before those 5 months. So the users were gradually just giving up. They were frustrated. They had goals from their managers, test cases that needed to be automated, and they couldn't do it because this tool didn't support them. Wow, what a nice background to walk right into. So I talked about that I want humanists in my team. I want people who understand that software development is so much more than just the technology that we're working with. That's all fine and dandy, but it's not enough to only have humanists in the team. I need technologists as well. I need people who are really good at what they do technology-wise. I want developers who know how to write clean code, how to abide by the solid principles and do refactoring. I need testers who are technically skilled, who know how to do stuff like stress test a REST API or test a distributed cloud system. I need technical testers who understand what a file system is and how the I/O buffers are affected by the certain things that we do. I need technically skilled people in my project alongside people that are gifted as humanists as well. I need people who know how to set up a continuous deliveries environment on the back of their hands. I need testers who know how to break a system through exploratory testing. And I need testers and developers who know how to write automated checks, unit checks, API checks, functional checks, all that. If we can mix that together in the team, then we have a recipe for success. Now here's a funny thing. We've seen over the years that companies claim to be quality first. Quality is very important to us. Of course, we have a product with high quality. Quality is very important for us and our users, but it turns out that it is actually quality if time permits. Because there's always going to be time pressure in the end of projects, and most companies tend to treat quality as, well, it's a nice to have. It's quality if time permits. Now, obviously, there's exceptions out there. There's companies like Blizzard who develop games, and they won't make a release until they deem the quality to be good enough, even if the schedule is delayed. But most companies don't treat quality that way. But here's another funny thing. It looks like people's self-esteem is actually tied to the quality of work that they're doing. If we do a good job, if we fulfill the quality criteria that we have internally, then we feel good about ourselves. We go home and say that, well, yeah, I did good today. That was good work. If we start to deliver software that doesn't meet our internal standards of qualities, then we don't feel so good about it. And we've been there both as developers and testers when management or project lead has forced us to release products when we knew they were not good enough. They were nowhere near good enough. And sometimes there are legitimate reasons to do that. But people's self-esteem seems to be tied to the quality of the work that they're doing. Now, in the project that I went into, we had a product owner who had the wisdom to say on the first day when we gathered together everyone, he said, well, guys, listen up. We need to deliver features. We need to, deliver new stuff. But defects are going to be a #1 priority, period. If we get bugs into our system and our users report them, we fix them immediately. Now, don't be silly and just drop whatever you're doing, but defects are always going to be a priority 1 if you're wondering what you're going to do. So we, throughout this whole project, fixed bugs almost as soon as they came into the system. And that had some profound effects, which I'll get back to a bit later. Now, there is this saying, and actually this was written in a book back in '79 by Philip Crosby called It's Free, where he basically wrote that high quality brings on cost reductions, and he said quality is free. Now, the problem here is that a lot of managers at that time read his book. Well, they didn't read it actually, they read the title, which said quality is free, and they said, wow, we don't need to do anything, quality is free. If they've actually bothered to read the book, they would have seen that quality is free, but only to those who pay heavily for it. So if we invest a lot of effort and time up front in developing software that has good standards and we fix bugs, then quality is going to be free over time. It's going to be much easier to work with the product over time, but we need to invest in it heavily firsthand. So back to our project. I had looked at the code. I had wept a bit. I may have screamed and shouted a bit. What do we do? Well, there was nothing to do but start cleaning up the mess. This was like a bad house party gone really, really bad. But what are you going to do? You clean up the mess. So the first thing that we needed to do was we needed to repair the build system. We needed, first of all, to figure out how do we put this code together and make a release of it. So we did that. And we repaired the build system so that we could, with the touch of a button, just build the system and produce a single binary. Before that, it had been a collection of different scripts, a whole lot of Java binaries, and there were some test data files in there that you had to put together manually before you could have a release. We threw all that away and we produced one single jar file, one binary that could be executed by testers alike. So we repaired the build system, and it took time, but we knew that we had to invest in this, because if we couldn't build frequently, then that would be a problem for us, because then we couldn't release the software as fast as we wanted to. Now, the next thing we needed to do was we needed to put this into our continuous integration and continuous delivery system. Because quite frankly, we were a group of mostly developers. I was the only one with a test background, and you get bored real fast when you have to doing manual builds all the time. Even if they're, just at the push of a button, you still feel like, oh, I don't want to do this. Can the computer do it for me? Well, yes, it can. So we set up continuous integration. It was nothing fancy. We just used the local Jenkins server, and we set it up so that it produced the single binary. We also put in, after time, we put in the unit tests and the API tests and the function tests that we implemented. And then what happened was that we told our users that, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to build software, and we're going to check in code to our master trunk, and it's going to build immediately and run the tests. We're going to make sure that it works according to the checks that we have. And then every night at 12 o'clock Swedish time, we're going to put together something called a nightly build. So we built the daily build, or a nightly build actually, and we put that on the network. It was a Unix system that it worked in, so we put in a symbolic link, and it was basically called nightlybuild.jar. So we could point to that, and we told our users, if you're going to point to that nightly build, you're going to get the latest and greatest. It's going to be built every night. It's going to contain the latest defect fixes and the latest features that we put into the master trunk. We're going to try to test it as good as we can before we put it into the master trunk, but we can't make all those promises that you may encounter some bugs sometimes. Now, if you want to have a more stable release, we're going to do that. At the end of every release cycle, we're going to make a release, and we're going to put that into the stable build instead. So you can use that if you want to. Just be prepared that you may get a new delivery every 2 to 3 weeks from that. So we put continuous integration and continuous delivery into place. Now, that combined with the fact that we had made defects a #1 priority suddenly encouraged our users to start using the nightly build, because they realized that if I report a bug to this team, and we made this clear to them, if I report a bug, I usually get a bug fixed within 24 to 48 hours. Wow, this was something that they've never experienced before. Most developers never experienced this, but we made it a priority to fix any bugs we got in as soon as possible. Now, what did this lead to? Well, it actually led to a lot more people who were starting to use the nightly build. So they were discovering the bugs that we missed a lot faster, but they didn't mind, because it got fixed real fast, and they felt that they were part of building something suddenly. They were part of helping us improve this framework. Now, after we repaired the build system, we got continuous integration and delivery into place, we started to actually clean up the code base. We started doing heavy refactoring of the product. Now, some of the things we actually, over the course of a couple of years, we never managed to remove because they were so technically complex, but we tried to clean up the code base the best we could, refactor it over time, which again raised the quality of the product. Most of the time, this was not something that the users immediately felt. They experienced it as a secondary effect in that we could start doing releases more often, or the code that we released held a better quality. And then we got to work on looking over the product backlog, which was, again, just a mess, because no one had really maintained the product backlog for this product over a couple of years, at least. There were a lot of stuff in there that was no longer relevant, no longer needed. And we trimmed away furiously so that we knew that the things that we're building right now is the most important thing to users at this point. And we had started working with Scrum, and we worked in 2-week sprint iterations, the standard stuff. We had retrospectives, we had demos for our users, we had planning meetings and all that. But after a while, we started in the team feeling that this was a bit cumbersome for us in this specific context. So a colleague of mine one morning, at this daily stand-up, he stood up and he said, well, guys, I've been thinking, why don't we try Kanban instead? And most of the people in the team hadn't tried Kanban. I had, and I said, wow, that sounds interesting. Because it turned out that what we were doing was that we were delivering a service, an internal service to this global company, and we could more or less put out a release at any time we wanted to. So it made perfect sense for us to just have a backlog, a Kanban board, where we worked on the item at the top and had it flow through a system of different states. And when something was done, it ended up on the far right on the Kanban board under a state called ready for release. And every morning our product owner came in and he could take a look at the Kanban board, and if he saw that there were enough features on the right side, he could say, well guys, let's do a release today. And we would say, sure. It took us approximately 2 hours to do that. We managed to trim it down even more, but most of the things that took time in our release was putting the documentation into place, doing the release notes and all that kind of stuff. But we could do it in a couple of hours. So we could do releases on demand, and we told our users that we're going to do releases as often as it's feasible. When we have enough new stuff in there, we're going to do a new stable release. But if you don't want to wait for that, use the nightly build instead. And no one actually complained. The people who thought that the release cycles were too long, they just used the nightly builds. And the people who didn't want to use the nightly builds and thought there were too many bugs in there, they just used the stable builds instead. Now at this point we had started to build up a relationship with our users. We had good communication in place. We had sprint demos where we demo the latest features and the bug fixes, which we were very proud of. And we had user focus groups every week where we met with the different people from all over the world. We discussed what problems they had, how we could help them, and so on. And as I said, we started sensing that our users were part of the system now. They wanted to help. They wanted to report bugs. They didn't mind that. So one morning I thought to myself, well, how can we encourage this behavior even more? So we had a daily stand-up, and I said, guys, I have this idea. And everyone looked at me and said, oh, what does Christopher think this time? And I said, well, we have people who report bugs. We have users who help us actually write documentation in their self-interest, of course, but they help us do that. I want to try gamification. And everyone's like, yeah, we want an excuse to use gamification as well. If you don't know what gamification is, it's basically a way for you to use game elements and mechanics to reward and steer people's behaviors, basically. So we introduced gamification in the system. And what we did was that any improvement that you make was rewarded with points. So we said, if you help us improve the documentation, could be a small email to us, or it could be a whole wiki document page or something else, or if you report a bug, then we're going to award you a point for that. And if you manage to collect 5 points as a user, you're going to get the pen. Now mind you, these were good things. These were a solid metal pen with a nice click sound. It's awesome. People actually want that. These were not the kind of pens that you get at a conference that you just come home and you throw them in a drawer and you forget they ever exist. And we also said, well, if you collect 15 points, you're going to get the t-shirt. And we printed a dorky t-shirt where we basically printed, I helped improve this product, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. That's a fun thing. And that's the thing you got to remember. If you're ever going to do gamification or something of the sorts, don't take yourself too seriously. It's going to be fun. It's going to be with the, the glint in the eye, basically. And then we said, well, if you amass 30 points, you're going to get the coffee mug. And it had our logo printed on it for the product that we were using. And people were really proud when they got this. They got the coffee mug, and they would walk into the team meetings with the coffee mug and put it very deliberately on the table, showing the other people in the teams. And they would say, wow, did you get a coffee mug? Yep. But all of this was done in a good-natured way. We were just having fun. Now the other thing that we did was, at the sprint reviews, we had a leaderboard which we updated regularly at our wiki page, and all the users that helped contribute and collected points, we put them on this leaderboard there basically. And if you were at the top, you had a little gold star next to your name, and you had a slightly darker green color to it. But this was our way to show that we really appreciated what our users were doing. And at the sprint demos, we would also highlight this. We would take the daily leaderboard and we would show that today Eli Riggin is the leader. Thank you so much for the help you've done lately to us. We would give people public recognition. It didn't cost us much to do this. In fact, it cost us almost next to nothing. But people felt appreciated, and they became our biggest allies in helping us improving this product. Now, one morning in this team, a lot of stuff happened at the daily stand-ups in this team, I can tell you. So one morning at the daily stand-up, our product owner came in. Now, our product owner was actually not a consultant from our consulting firm. He was from the customer. And he came in and said, guys, I saw this cool article the other day, because he had sensed that we were kind of geeky, and he in turn turned out was actually kind of geeky as well. And he showed us this article where a company had written a blog post where they had created a Kanban board entirely out of Lego. And we were just blown away. We said, wow, this is so cool. We want to do this. And our product owner, coming from this other company, this larger global company, said, well, can you do that? And you got to realize at this point that the consultancy firm that we work for, we had this attitude of we can do anything we want to as long as it doesn't hurt the customer. If it's good for the customer, we'll just do it. So we looked over this, we looked at our Kanban board, and then I went over to our consultancy manager and I said, hi, I have this idea together with the team. And he looked at me, looked in my eyes, he must have seen something there, because he said, Christopher, what is it this time? And I said, and I explained the idea, and I said, well, we want to build this Kanban board out of Lego, and it would be geeky, and it would be fun, and it would be a way for us to build culture in the team, a way for us to, mark ourselves out, to grow a sense of identity in the team. And I said, in return, I'll promise I'll write a very nice blog post where I talk about how fun it is to work at this geeky company. And he looked at me, and he said, I love it. Let's do it. So we put together in a couple of hours an Excel spreadsheet where we calculated how much Lego we needed to buy, what it was going to cost, and then we ordered the parts. A couple of weeks later, we had all the parts, and we had so much fun that morning when we ripped up the Lego packages and we built the Kanban board together. It was a really fun happening in the team, and our product owner from the customer, he couldn't believe his eyes. Wow, is it this easy to get permission to do something? And that is the thing you got to remember as an employee. A lot of the times you just got to ask. We are masters at censoring ourselves because we think that, oh, I probably can't do this, so I won't ask. But if you just ask your manager, a lot of the times they will surprise you. So we built a Lego board, and I'll get back to that in a short while. This is pictures of how we built our Lego board, and you can see we ordered blue Lego plates. We put up our whole process there. We had everything from the backlog to ongoing documentation, reviews, testing, and ready for release there. And we built everything just out of Lego, and you can see we had different Lego figures in there. And one of the things that we said was that as a team member, you get to choose your own Lego figure. And you actually got to choose 3 copies of the same Lego figures, because it turned out you could be working on multiple tasks at the same time. So people choose different ones. For instance, I choose Gandalf for mine, because which self-respecting tester doesn't want to stand up and say, none shall pass at the test lane? We had other people who took the Space Marine. We had our product owner, for some reason, who got stuck with the circus director and the whip in his hand. But then we had to introduce some limits as well. It turns out that you can't order free copies of Darth Vader collectibles because they cost like 500 Swedish kronor a piece, and that would be like 150 euros. And I, for one, didn't want to go and explain that to our consultancy manager. So we had some limits in there, but man, it would be cool to have Darth Vader on the Lego board. Did I say we were geeky in the team? Culture. I mentioned that now quite a few times. Culture in a company is something huge. Actually, culture contains accepted ways to express and validate our assumptions, values, and norms, and through that way avoid being uncertain in different situations. That's Price and Bayer from 93, their definition of it. So culture contains accepted ways to express and validate our assumptions, values, and norms, and through that way avoid being uncertain in different situations. So you know how it is when you come to a new company, you don't know what the culture is there at first. Is it okay if I speak up in meetings? Should I just sit down and be quiet, or are people expecting me to do that? Does people want me to take initiative, drive stuff, or should I just be a team player and, you know, not stick out too much? So we are uncertain in the beginning because we don't know the company culture. And when we start learning the culture, we avoid being uncertain in different situations because we know what is socially acceptable there. And company culture is a very strong thing. And whether we want it or not, we are going to adapt to a lesser or higher degree to company culture when we start somewhere. One of the things at the customer site, the big global telecommunications manufacturing company, the culture there was that they used an agile tool. Now, I want to talk a minute about hard or so-called agile tools. Now, if you've ever used them, which most of you have, you know what I'm talking about. They're horrible. They are these digitalized tools that you log into a web page or somewhere and you manage your Scrum board or your Kanban board there digitally. And usually they're not good. They're in your way, they're slow to work with, or they don't support specifically your way of working in the team. And of course, this customer here, they had chosen the absolute worst so-called agile tools that I've ever seen. It was slow to work with, it was inefficient, and to this day, I've never seen something as horrible as it. Slow, bad performance, and you would think that it would be easy to update a task with a new time estimate. Yesterday it was 13, now I want to have it at 8 hours. Oh, it doesn't have 8 hours in the drop-down menu. You would think that you could just input 8 as a new integer and it would accept that. No, no, no. You have to create a new integer called 8 for an estimate, which meant you have to navigate to the control panel, you have to go into the project settings, and you would need to create this new 8. Tomorrow, it's going to be an estimate 3 hours left. Guess what I needed to do? It was hard to work with this tool. And the culture in our consultancy firm was that, well, we don't always play by the rules. We try to, we don't break the rules, we may just bend them sometimes. So what we did was that we said, we're going to have our own board. So we had our physical Kanban board, that was our Lego board. And then we had a poor team member who every day after the daily stand-up, when we updated our physical Kanban board, he went over and he logged into the customer's so-called agile tool, and he had to update all the Kanban tasks by himself. Now that took time, he was frustrated, but he did it. We felt sorry for him. And another thing that was part of the culture in this company was that we were self-proclaimed geeks. We loved to hack around and do different experiments and learn new stuff, basically. So one morning I said, well, I've been wanting to play around a bit with optical recognition, and I had a few Raspberry Pi boards at home. So I told the team, and I said, I have an idea. And we had this idea that we used a library called OpenCV, we used a webcam, and we used Raspberry Pi. And we turned the webcam to our physical Kanban board, our Lego figures. And it took a picture of the Kanban board every 5 minutes, and we used OpenCV, which is a optical recognition system, and we identified where the different Lego figures were on the board and the different user stories, the different tasks on the board as well. You may see that as the small white tasks on the orange and green post-its there, and those were actually where we printed the numbers for our tasks. So our system were able to identify which Lego figure was working on what task and in what state on the Kanban board it was. And we discovered that the so-called Agile tool actually had one great thing talking in favor of it. It had an API. So we tied our Raspberry Pis into updating the Agile tool for us whenever we moved a figure or a post-it on the Kanban board. Kind of cool. And you can see how the little rectangles around the Lego figures are actually our software that recognizes the different figures there on the board. We didn't break the rules. We still use the management's so-called Agile tool, and they show them progress and all that. We just used a physical board in our team room and moved them there. Diving a bit into culture a bit more. Culture can be seen as a reflection of the surrounding society or as a subculture. That is, company culture takes into effect the context where we actually act accordingly. So if we're a company based in Sweden, we are going to pick up a lot of Swedish culture or ways and norms how to behave. If we're located in India, we adopt certain ways in the culture there, or in the States, or in France, or wherever. So we are going to be we had a saying, det går inte. And that basically translates to, it won't work. Because the town I work in is an old military and naval town, a lot of blue-collar workers there, and there was this attitude of, well, we can't do this. So we had to constantly fight against this. What I want to say with this is that the culture around you sets the constraints. You and your team are going to act according to the culture surrounding you, knowingly or unknowingly, because we want to be team players, we want to fit in. And we were blessed in my team that we were a team of consultants sitting off-site, not part of the customer site, and we could in large parts manage ourselves. If we would have been on-site at the customer's place, culture there would most certainly would have set the constraints otherwise, and there would have been very little we could do about it. Now, the way I told the story for you today, it makes it sound like this was a very linear process, but in fact, it actually wasn't. A lot of things needed to happen in parallel or reinforce each other for things to go this well that it did at this point. So for instance, when we started this project, we needed to set up communication properly. We needed to make sure that we communicated properly with our users and that they communicated with us. And that in turn, when we started communicating, that led to a certain level of trust being built up. Because if you communicate, that helps enable trust. It doesn't certainly lead to trust, but it sure can help. Now, this in turn made us realize that we need to automate the builds that we're doing. We need to automate everything so that we can get a sense of pace, that we can, on a paced event, put up new builds. so that our users know that every night there's going to be a new nightly build, every 2 to 3 weeks there's going to be a new stable release, and so on. Now this in turn, this predictability fed into the trust so that our users trust us even more. That fed into more communication. When people communicate more with us, then we can discover their needs, and maybe we won't need to change the pace of how we release the software. All of this meant that we could be more context aware. We could be aware of the needs that our users had because they were communicating with us, they were trusting us, they were letting their guards down saying, well, we actually do have these problems in our project and we need help with this feature because blah, blah, blah. So we could have a new sense of context awareness. What were our users' problems? Remember, these were a whole lot of different products in different departments spread out over the world, and our frameworks were being used in a very generic way. So we needed to understand our users' problems. And this led to transparency from their part and from our part. We always showed on the sprint demos what we were doing, which problems we had, which decisions we were taking. We had weekly user groups where we discussed openly what our plans were. And this again fed into the whole trust, communication, which in turn reinforced context awareness and all that kind of stuff. And at the very end, this fostered a sense of engagement from our users because they felt that they could trust us, that we understood their problems, what they were needing. So they were starting to get engaged in the project and were helping with reporting bugs, writing small wiki articles about how to use the product and so on, which in turn fostered engagement from our part because we felt a sense of duty towards our users. We were helping them solve problems. It was a great feeling. And that in turn fostered excellence from our part, and our users wanted to rise to that as well. And in the end, that meant that this tool now started to be integrated again into the different departments' way of working, because we were building a tool with context awareness, using transparency. We had a pace where we put out new deliveries all the time, and we were communicating. So if you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, and you need to relaunch a product and get your users to use it, just think about CAT Pact A. Or don't. Actually, it's a really bad abbreviation. Regardless, what I want to say with this slide is that all of these things fit together, and you need to think of it as a system. Things reinforce each other, and it's not a linear process. And really, if you're a manager of a team of highly technical and skilled people, what you should never do is starting micromanaging the people in your team. Mr. and Mrs. Manager, you need to treat your employees with respect. You need to leave the technical decisions to the people that you hire, because that's the reason why you hire them. They are the experts with the technical decisions. You need to work with the organizational decisions, how to organize your teams, how communications is put to place, how to foster trust within the department. That is your job, Mr. and Mrs. Manager. You need to treat the adults in your department as adults and not small children. And you need to not be afraid of emotions showing up in teams, because emotions are not only necessary for a technical teams, they're really highly necessary in order to have a successful launch. And testers and developers out there, you need to hold yourselves to a higher standard. You need to bring that sense of excellence and being aware of what you're doing and trying to do good work each and every day, because that fosters trust with your managers. You need to show passion, because when you show passion that you care about good testing or good programming, that will reflect on your team members, and they will do that as well, because it becomes a part of the team culture suddenly. Don't scoff at people who go home and read a really geeky test article in the evenings and think that they're crazy. Encourage it. Adopt to it. Change the culture in the team. If we trust the people around us, they will rise to the occasion, and we can actually foster a culture of excellence with the people that we work with. And by that, I've reached the end of my webinar. So thank you so much for listening in, and I hand it over to you, Derek.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I'm just going to open up my slides here again and just go through one or two slides here. Okay, for starters, just want to mention that Christopher will be presenting again this year at EuroSTAR. He will be doing a tutorial entitled Cultivating a Team Culture of Self-Empowerment and Innovation. And if you want to find out some more details about that presentation, just head over to the EuroSTAR website. We have some more webinars coming up this week. We have a webinar tomorrow with Mara Pujärvi on mob testing, and another one of our EuroSTAR speakers 2016, Karen Johnson, is going to be doing a webinar on how manual testers can help with automation efforts. And all of our sessions are now live on the EuroSTAR website, so you can see all of our different sessions that are coming up for the 2016 conference in Stockholm. And we even have a 15% discount if you register before the end of May. For those of you who can't wait until October for the EuroSTAR conference, we'll be running a EuroSTAR roadshow in Warsaw next week on the 27th of April. And we will have a number of different speakers there from the EuroSTAR program. So you can check that out on the EuroSTAR website, and there's a 10% discount at the moment if you apply the discount there in the bottom, SPK or 16. So Christopher, if you want to have a look at some of the questions that have come in here. And let me see here, there's one question here asking, doesn't the pointing system make some people feel less beneficial, or is that the point to make them work harder?
Could you repeat the question again?
I will indeed. The question here, it's more of a statement really, I guess. It's saying, doesn't the pointing system make some people feel less beneficial, or is that the point to make them work harder?
The pointing system, so the whole gamification system. Well, you got to remember, the gamification system wasn't a way for us to control our users or manipulate them. And that's actually one of the dangers of doing gamification badly. You can actually start to manipulate people's feelings and emotions. But the reason why we introduced this was that we saw certain behavior that we liked. And this was basically our informal way of saying thank you so much for doing this. It was a fun, light-weighted thing, and we always made, we made small jokes about it in the sprint demo, just to re-emphasize it. This was just something fun that we did, and it was our way to say thank you to our users.
Another one of our attendees here is asking, how long did this project take? That is, how quick or how slow did these changes take place?
Well, it was a gradual process, and I would say that we started seeing some results after half a year, maybe. Then after a year, I would say that we started seeing the full effect of this, and at that point we had started to reach through to our users, and they were getting what we were doing, and they were starting to trust us. I remained in this second wave of the project for, I think it was 2 years, all in all. And that's one of the things that you absolutely need to remember. If you're reflecting upon company culture and what it is, and you may want to try to influence it in some ways, you need to remember a very long process, and you need to be patient with it, and it's going to take time, because if you just dip your toes into it and try to change something, the culture is going to swing right back. The culture is a reflection of the surrounding context. So I make this analogy of a spring, so like a car spring, a suspender. Now, the culture is like the spring. If I come in as a consultant, and this has happened on numerous occasions where managers tell me, well, Chris, we want you to come into this team and help them change the culture and all that. Now, if I'm just going in there for a couple of months, I'm going to push on the culture. I'm going to lean on that spring. And I'm going to have maybe a certain effect on it. But if I withdraw too quick, then the spring is just going to bounce right back into the state it was before. So you need to be a part of the team for a long time, because that spring is rooted in the ground, and the ground here being the context surrounding. Context being company, managers, customers, products, history, artifacts, all that. And I may be able to change the inclination of that ground with, a fraction of a degree. But thinking that you can come into a team and change that spring, that culture permanently, then you're just having grand delusions, basically.
We might take one more question, Christopher. We've gone a couple of minutes over, so we'll just take one more if that's okay.
Yep.
This question here, and it says here, everybody needs room to grow. When you're only looking for experts and people who are already extremely good, don't you close the door for potential future experts and gurus? That is how I hear your "I need people who are excellent" mantra.
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry that it's being interpreted that way, because that's absolutely not my intention. But if we have people in the team who are very good at what they do, then we can bring on new people who may not, as the person asking this question, they may need room to grow. But if they're part of a team where the culture encourages this, where we say that, well, we want to do excellent work and we want to learn, we want to better ourselves, then I think we can take on new people and help them grow. But if we don't have that foundation in the team, if we don't have that culture, bringing on new people can have a negative effect. And that's one of the reasons why I say it's so important, if you're a tester or programmer and you're looking for your first job, you need to be very, very careful in what company and what culture you're joining. Because if you're joining one of these large companies, global, there's this sense of fitting in and not doing too much and don't be excellent, then that's going to taint you for the rest of your career. I've seen a lot of young, really talented people being bogged down by this kind of mentality. While on the other hand, if you join another type of team where your peers or seniors encourage you to grow, then that will be part of you. And that's one of the reasons why I'm ever so grateful to my first manager, because he showed me and the others in the department that it was okay to geek out and be nerdy about testing, and it's something fun and we want to excel in it. So I am in no way saying that we should exclude new people who need room to grow. I just say that we need to foster a culture where it's okay to grow and become better.
Okay, we'll wrap it up at that. Just want to say thank you very much to Christopher for today's presentation. It was a very well received keynote last year, and I believe there was a standing ovation, so it was very, very popular. We're delighted he's come back again today to give us another edition of his presentation. Some great feedback here from our attendees. A lot of people are saying thank you, great fun. One of our attendees here even says, I would like to have a team member like him. That's always good to hear. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, Darag.
Okay, and thank you to all of our attendees. We have some more webinars this week that you can join us for, so just head over to Test Huddle. You can register there, and a recording of this webinar will also be available on the Test Huddle website very shortly. Thank you all, and take care.